In the winter of 1943, German supply convoys moving through the Eastern Front carried a chilling statistic in their reports. Over 23,000 Soviet bombing sorties had been flown against their positions. But here's what made those numbers truly terrifying. Every single one of those missions was piloted by women. Flying planes made of wood and canvas that shouldn't have been able to survive a single night of war. Picture this. It's 2 a.m. on the frozen steppes of Ukraine, December 15, 1942. German soldiers of the 6th Army huddle around campfires near Morozovsk, their breath forming clouds in the bitter cold that has already claimed more lives than Soviet bullets. The temperature sits at -35 degrees Celsius. Suddenly, a faint humming sound drifts through the darkness, so quiet it could be mistaken for wind through the trees. Veteran soldiers freeze mid-conversation. They know that sound. Then comes something worse: silence. Complete unnatural silence. In that moment of eerie calm, Sergeant Klaus Hoffmann scribbles his final diary entry. They are here again. The witches. May God have... The sentence never finishes. Explosions tear through their ammunition depot. Fuel trucks erupting in towering flames that turn night into day. 23 tons of ordnance detonate in a chain reaction that can be heard 15 kilometers away. The blast kills 47 men instantly and wounds another 112. The soldiers who survive scramble for their weapons, searching the sky for the sleek fighter planes they expect to see. Instead, if they're lucky enough to glimpse anything at all through the smoke and flames, they catch sight of a fragile biplane disappearing into the darkness, a relic from aviation's earliest days, its canvas wings barely visible against the star-filled sky, piloted by someone the German High Command had dismissed just months earlier as nothing more than a propaganda stunt. They called them Nachthexen, night witches. And by the time the German pilots stopped laughing, it was already too late. Our story begins not with triumph, but with catastrophe. The year is 1941, and Adolf Hitler's war machine has unleashed Operation Barbarossa on June 22nd, the largest military invasion in human history. 4 million Axis troops, supported by 600,000 vehicles and 750,000 horses, pour across the Soviet border like a steel tide, leaving behind them a trail of scorched earth and shattered lives that stretches from the Baltic to the Black Sea. The scale of the disaster defies comprehension. In just the first 3 weeks, the Luftwaffe destroys over 4,000 Soviet aircraft, many of them caught on the ground before their pilots can even reach their cockpits. By September, German panzer divisions have encircled Kiev, trapping 665,000 Soviet soldiers in the largest encirclement battle in history. Leningrad faces a siege that will last 872 days and claim nearly 1 million lives. The Wehrmacht stands just 30 kilometers from the Kremlin, close enough that German officers claim they can see the spires of Moscow through their field glasses. In just 5 months, the Wehrmacht captures 3 million Soviet prisoners, overruns territory home to 40% of the Soviet population, and seizes the industrial heartland that produces most of Stalin's weapons. The Soviet Air Force has been decimated, with experienced pilots dead or captured, airfields destroyed, and aircraft production facilities evacuated thousands of kilometers eastward. Stalin's regime teeters on the edge of collapse, and across the Reich, Nazi propaganda ministers declare victory inevitable by Christmas. But in the smoking ruins of Soviet airfields, amid the chaos of retreat and the desperation of a nation fighting for survival, something extraordinary begins to stir. As German bombs fall on cities and villages, as families flee westward with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the hope that tomorrow might bring salvation, young Soviet women make a decision that will echo through history. On September 8, 1941, 18-year-old Nadezhda Popova stands in the ruins of her family home in Donbass. German bombs have killed her brother in the first week of the war. Her father disappeared with the retreating Red Army. Her mother and sister have evacuated east, but Nadezhda refuses to run. She walks 15 kilometers to the nearest military recruitment office, her jaw set with determination that the skeptical officer behind the desk mistakes for naivety. "I want to fly," she tells him. "I want to drop bombs on the fascists who did this," the officer laughs. Not cruelly, but with the tired condescension of a man who has seen too many civilians with romantic notions of warfare. "Girl," he says, using the diminutive that makes her blood boil. Go home. Find your mother. The Red Army doesn't need... She cuts him off. I have 200 hours of flight time. I was training for my instructor's license at the Kherson Flying Club when the war started. I can navigate, I can fly at night, and I will not go home. The officer's expression changes. 200 hours of flight experience represents more training than many of the male pilots now dying in droves against the Luftwaffe. But she's a woman, and regulations are clear about women in combat roles. Nadezhda isn't alone. Across the Soviet Union, hundreds of young women descend on recruitment offices with the same impossible request. Ekaterina Ryabova, a chemistry student from Moscow. Irina Sebrova, who had dreamed of becoming a dancer. Maria Smirnova, a factory worker from Stalingrad. All of them share the same burning desire that no amount of bureaucratic resistance can extinguish. They don't seek shelter. They don't evacuate. Instead, they volunteer to fight back, not as nurses or radio operators, but as combat pilots. Their letters pile up by the thousands on the desk of one woman who has the power to turn their dreams into reality. Marina Raskova, the Soviet Union's most famous female aviator, receives these letters in her Moscow apartment while German artillery pounds the city's outskirts. Before the war, Raskova had become a household name by setting multiple long-distance flight records and becoming the first woman to teach navigation at the Zhukovsky Air Force Academy. Stalin himself had awarded her the Hero of the Soviet Union medal, making her one of the few people in the USSR with direct access to the General Secretary. Now, as Moscow trembles under German assault and the Soviet leadership debates whether to evacuate the capital, Raskova makes her move. She gathers the most compelling letters, testimonies of loss, pledges of vengeance, detailed descriptions of aviation experience, and carries them directly to the Kremlin. The meeting takes place on October 8, 1941, with German forces just weeks away from Moscow. Stalin, exhausted from sleepless nights coordinating the defense, initially dismisses the proposal. Women pilots in combat? It's unthinkable. The Soviet Union has always prided itself on gender equality, but this goes beyond factory work or even frontline medicine. This is asking women to kill, but Raskova presses her case with facts that Stalin cannot ignore. The Soviet Air Force has lost thousands of trained pilots. Conventional recruitment cannot replace them fast enough. Meanwhile, hundreds of women with genuine aviation experience are being turned away from service simply because of their gender. The logic becomes inescapable. The Soviet Union needs every pilot it can get, regardless of whether they wear skirts or trousers. On October 8, 1941, Order number 0099 is issued from the People's Commissariat of Defense. It authorizes the formation of 3 all-female aviation regiments: the 586th Fighter Aviation Regiment, the 587th Bomber Aviation Regiment, and the 588th Night Bomber Aviation Regiment. It's an experiment born of desperation, and no one, not even Raskova herself, believes all 3 units will survive the first winter of combat. The 588th Night Bomber Regiment forms in Engels, a small city on the Volga River, in the autumn of 1941, under conditions that would challenge even the most seasoned male pilots. The women who arrive at the training facility come from every corner of the Soviet Union, representing every social class and background. 19-year-old Yevgenia Zhigulenko, who had worked as a pilot crop-dusting collective farms. 22-year-old Polina Gelman, a history student from Brest, who watched German tanks roll through her hometown on the war's first day. Serafima Amosova Taranenko, a textile engineer who had learned to fly on weekends at her local aero club. These young women, many barely out of their teens, received truncated training on aircraft that were obsolete before the war even began. The standard pilot training program, which normally takes 2 years, is compressed into 6 months. They study navigation by starlight, practice landing in complete darkness, and memorize the silhouettes of German aircraft they'll encounter over enemy territory. They sleep in unheated barracks, where ice forms on the inside of windows and their breath crystals in the air. They drill with equipment held together by wire and hope, wearing flight suits cut for men that hang awkwardly on their smaller frames. They endure the constant ridicule of their male counterparts stationed at the same facility, who view their presence as a dangerous joke that will get people killed. Look at the aviatrixes. Male pilots jeer as the women march to morning formation. Stalin's flying circus. Don't worry, girls, we'll send you home when the real war starts. The women ignore them. They have to. Because beneath the mockery lies a terrifying truth that every one of them understands. They will get only one chance to prove themselves. One failure, one disaster, and order number 0099 will be quietly revoked. The experiment declared a failure, and they will be sent back to factory work or nursing, while men continue to fight for their country's survival. Their commander, Major Yevdokia Bershanskaya, faces a task that seems impossible. A veteran pilot with thousands of flight hours, Bershanskaya must transform seamstresses, teachers, and factory workers into night bombers capable of striking fear into the heart of the Wehrmacht. 27 years old, she possesses the rare combination of technical expertise and leadership charisma needed to forge an elite unit from raw material. She begins with brutal honesty. On the first day of training, she assembles her pilots and navigators in the frozen hangar and speaks words that will haunt them through the years to come. Half of you will not survive the first year of combat. Of those who do, half will not see the war's end. You will fly in conditions that would ground every other aircraft in our inventory. You will navigate by stars and landmarks, while German searchlights hunt you and flak fills the sky with steel. You will do this night after night, sometimes flying multiple sorties before dawn. And you will do it in aircraft that Germany does not consider worthy of the name. She pauses, letting the words sink in, watching for signs of doubt or fear. She sees none. Only grim determination, and eyes that burn with the fires they've already witnessed. Good, she says. Then we begin. The women have courage, certainly, and motivation beyond measure, but courage alone doesn't teach you to navigate by starlight when clouds obscure the moon. Motivation doesn't help when your controls freeze solid at 8,000 feet, and you have 30 seconds to restore function before you spiral into the ground. What they lack in experience, they must gain through training so intensive it borders on abuse. They fly practice missions in conditions that terrify experienced pilots. Snowstorms that reduce visibility to zero. Moonless nights, where the ground and sky merge into one uniform darkness. High winds that toss their fragile biplanes like leaves. Bershanskaya pushes them relentlessly because she knows what awaits them. Over enemy territory will be 10 times worse. What the women lack in experience, however, they make up for in determination that borders on the fanatical. These women have seen their cities burn, their families scattered, their country invaded by an enemy that views them as subhuman slaves fit only for slavery or extermination. Every training flight carries the weight of personal vengeance. Every bombing run a promise to make the invaders pay for their crimes. Nadezhda Popova, who will become one of the regiment's most decorated pilots, later recalls, "We were not fighting for Stalin or communism. We were fighting because fascists had come to our homes and killed our families. Every bomb we dropped was for a brother, a father, a sister who would never come home. That kind of motivation cannot be taught. It burns inside you like a furnace." As winter deepens and their training intensifies, the women of the 588th begin to understand the true nature of their mission. They won't be flying the sleek Yak-1 fighters or the powerful PE-2 dive bombers that dominate Soviet propaganda posters. Instead, they're assigned to aircraft that seem more suited to a museum than a battlefield. The Polikarpov PO-2, a biplane designed in 1927 for training civilian pilots and dusting crops with pesticide. The first time Yevgenia Zhigulenko sees the aircraft she'll take into combat, she stands in stunned silence. The Po-2 looks like something from the previous war. 2 canvas-covered wings stacked on a wooden frame, held together by wire struts and faith. Its 2-stroke M11 engine produces just 125 horsepower, barely enough to lift the aircraft and its payload of bombs. Imagine climbing into an open cockpit where the temperature routinely drops to 40 below zero. Your position as pilot sits in the rear seat, exposed to the full force of freezing wind that screams past at 120 kilometers per hour. Your navigator crouches in the front seat, even more exposed, reading maps by flashlight while frostbite slowly claims her fingers. Between you, there's no radio, no communication system beyond shouting over the engine noise and tapping each other on the shoulder. Picture flying in an aircraft with a maximum speed of 152 kilometers per hour at optimal altitude, slower than most modern cars on a highway, slower than German fighters can fly without stalling. Made from plywood and canvas, the Po-2's structure is so fragile that bullets pass through it like paper, leaving neat holes in the fabric wings. The aircraft carries no defensive armament, no machine guns for protection, no armor plating to shield the crew from flak or fighter attack. Its bomb load maxes out at just 350 kilograms, 2 bombs. Carried in makeshift racks welded beneath the fuselage, the navigation equipment consists of a compass, an altimeter, and an airspeed indicator. No radio navigation, no instrument landing system, no artificial horizon for flying in clouds. Night missions are conducted entirely by dead reckoning, finding your way by landmarks, stars, and hope. German pilots, accustomed to the roar of their Messerschmitt Bf-109s, with their 1,500 horsepower engines and the sleek power of modern warfare, take one look at these antiquated biplanes and burst into laughter. They nicknamed the Po-2 the flying sewing machine because its 2-stroke engine putters, along with a rhythmic chug-chug-chug that sounds like a grandmother's pedal-powered sewing machine. The mockery extends through all levels of the Luftwaffe, from ground crew to aces with dozens of kills. Everyone considers the Po-2 a joke. It's an insult, one German pilot writes to his family in November 1941. They send these ancient kites against us and expect us to take them seriously. We could shoot them down with pistols if we wanted to waste the ammunition. But orders are orders, so we laugh and let the flak gunners have their fun. But the night witches understand something their enemies don't. In war, the most dangerous weapon is often the one your opponent underestimates. The Po-2's fabric construction, which seems like a fatal weakness, makes it nearly invisible to radar. The primitive radio location devices the Germans use to detect bombers simply cannot get a solid return from canvas and wood. On radar screens, the Po-2s appear as ghosts, if they appear at all. Its slow speed, which seems suicidal in modern aerial combat, allows it to fly below the stall speed of German fighters. A Messerschmitt Bf-109, built for speeds exceeding 600 km per hour, cannot slow down to match the Po-2's crawling pace without its engine stalling and sending the aircraft into a death spiral. The Germans have created fighters that are too fast to catch their prey. Most importantly, its simple 2-stroke engine can be completely shut off in flight, allowing the Po-2 to glide silently through the night sky. This capability transforms the aircraft from a noisy target into a phantom of death. With the engine off, the only sound is the whisper of wind through the wing. Struts, so quiet that German soldiers on the ground cannot hear it, until bombs are already falling on their heads. Women learn to embrace these limitations, transforming weakness into strength through tactical brilliance that compensates for technological inferiority. They discover through bitter experience that their wooden planes can withstand battle damage that would down a metal aircraft. Bullets pass through canvas without causing structural failure. The flexible fabric simply closes around the hole. The wooden frame absorbs impacts that would shatter rigid aluminum, and the simple wire and strut construction can be repaired in the field with basic tools and materials. Lieutenant Irina Zayabrova returns from a mission with 42 bullet holes in her aircraft's wings and fuselage. The ground crew counts each one, expecting to find the plane unflyable. Instead, they patch the holes with fabric and glue, and Zayabrova takes the same aircraft up again that night. "The Germans gave me a new ventilation system," she jokes, though the freezing wind through those holes nearly causes her to lose consciousness from hypothermia. What the Germans see as pathetic obsolescence, the night witches recognize as perfect adaptation to their deadly trade. The Po-2 isn't designed to fight German fighters. It's designed to avoid them entirely. It isn't built to drop massive bomb loads. It's built to deliver small, precise strikes night after night until the accumulated damage drives the enemy insane. Their first combat missions in the spring of 1942 are exercises in controlled disaster that nearly end the experiment before it can prove its worth. The 588th deploys to the front near Krasnodar on May 27, 1942, inheriting a makeshift airfield that's little more than a grass strip carved from a collective farm's wheat field. Their ground crew consists of teenage girls who have never seen an aircraft engine before the war. On the night of May 28, 1942, 9 Po-2s take off for their first combat mission, a bombing raid against German positions 12 kilometers behind the front lines. The target is a forward command post identified by reconnaissance. The mission unfolds as a comedy of errors that would be funny if people weren't dying. Lieutenant Polina Gelman's navigation calculations are off by 3 kilometers, sending her bombs falling harmlessly into an abandoned field. Lieutenant Yevgenia Rudneva's compass freezes solid, forcing her to navigate by following another aircraft that's also lost. 2 pilots abort the mission when their engines refuse to restart after they cut them for silent approaches. But disaster truly strikes when Lieutenant Katya Fedotova, flying only her second combat mission, loses orientation in the darkness. Unable to find her target or her airfield, she circles aimlessly until her fuel gauge reads empty. She attempts an emergency landing in what she thinks is Soviet territory. It isn't. German soldiers capture her and her navigator before dawn, making them the 588th's first prisoners of war. The women who return to base that night sit in stunned silence, processing their failure. They've flown into combat with high hopes and brave hearts, and they've achieved almost nothing except losing 2 of their sisters. Male pilots at the airfield make no effort to hide their satisfaction. "We told you," they say. "This is not work for women." Major Bashanskaya assembles her pilots in the pre-dawn darkness and delivers a speech that will define their future. "Tonight, we failed. We got lost, we missed targets, we lost an aircraft and crew." The men are laughing at us, and we've given them reason to laugh. But here is what we learned. Lieutenant Gelman now knows exactly how to compensate for magnetic variation in navigation calculations. Lieutenant Rudneva knows to check her compass before takeoff and carry a backup. Every pilot now understands that fuel management is life or death. We paid dearly for these lessons. Now we will use them. She pauses, her eyes moving from face to face. "Tomorrow night we fly again, and the night after, and the night after that. We will fly until we perfect our art. We will fly until the Germans stop laughing. We will fly until they fear the sound of our engines more than they fear death itself." Who's with me? Every hand rises. The lessons learned in blood and failure begin to pay dividends. The women develop tactics uniquely suited to their aircraft's capabilities. They discover that flying in groups of 3, with 2 aircraft drawing searchlights and flak, while the third attacks from darkness, multiplies their effectiveness. They learn to vary their approach paths, speeds, and altitudes, so enemy gunners cannot predict their movements. They master the art of using terrain for cover, flying so low through valleys that German radar cannot distinguish them from ground clutter. The breakthrough comes on the night of June 12, 1942, when a flight of 3 Po-2s approaches a German forward airfield near Maikop. The lead pilot, Senior Lieutenant Yevgenia Zigulenko, has studied the target for 3 days, memorizing every detail of the approach, the location of anti-aircraft guns, the pattern of searchlights. 20 kilometers from the target, she cuts her engine and signals her wingmates to do the same. 3 Po-2s begin a long, silent glide toward the German airfield below. Zigulenko guides her plane with subtle movements of stick and rudder, descending through the darkness like a hunting owl. German sentries hear nothing. The searchlights sweep empty sky. Anti-aircraft guns remain silent because their crews have detected no threat. At 800 meters altitude, Zigulenko can see the neat rows of Heinkel bombers parked along the airfield's eastern edge. At 600 meters, she can make out the fuel depot near the runway threshold. At 400 meters, she pulls the bomb release. 2 50-kilogram bombs tumble through the darkness. Zigulenko pulls up into a steep climb, her engine roaring back to life as explosions bloom like deadly flowers across the airfield below. Her wingmates follow seconds later, their bombs adding to the devastation. By the time German searchlights slice through the darkness and anti-aircraft guns begin firing, the night witches have vanished into the vast Ukrainian night. 23 German aircraft destroyed, fuel depot ablaze, ammunition stockpile detonating in a chain reaction that lights up the horizon for miles. Total Soviet losses, 0. The next morning, German intelligence officers study the wreckage and file reports that reveal their complete bewilderment. How did Soviet bombers penetrate their defenses without being detected? What kind of aircraft could approach without triggering radar or acoustic sensors? Why did no one hear them coming? The laughter stops that night. German pilots who had mocked the flying sewing machines now stare at the smoldering wreckage of their squadron and realize they're facing an enemy unlike any they've encountered before. These aren't the conventional bomber formations they've trained to intercept. These are ghosts that strike without warning and disappear without trace as spring turns to summer and the night witches. Reputation spreads across the Eastern Front. A new sound begins to haunt German positions, from Crimea to Stalingrad. Soldiers lying in their bunkers listen for the telltale putter of approaching Po-2 engines. But increasingly, they hear something far more terrifying. Nothing at all. The silence that precedes a night witch attack becomes more feared than any air raid siren. German troops, already stressed by the brutal realities of the Eastern Front, the savage combat, the partisan ambushes, the endless expanse of hostile territory, now face an enemy that attacks their very sense of security. Corporal Hans Müller, stationed near Rostov-on-Don, writes in a letter intercepted by Soviet intelligence, "Sleep is impossible. Every night we wait for them. Sometimes they come 3 times before dawn, sometimes just once, but they always come. You cannot see them, cannot hear them until the bombs are falling. Men are cracking under the strain." Yesterday, Schneider opened fire on nothing, claiming he heard engines. The only sound was wind. The psychological warfare proves as devastating as the physical destruction. German supply lines, which must operate at night to avoid Soviet day bombers, become shooting galleries for the night witches. Convoys that once moved with confidence now crawl through the darkness with engines running at minimum volume. Drivers constantly scanning the sky for threats they cannot see. Wehrmacht reports from July 1942 reveal the growing desperation of German commanders. The Russian women pilots, Major General Friedrich Kirchner writes to his superiors at Army Group South headquarters, attack with a persistence that borders on the fanatical. They give us no rest, no respite. Every night brings fresh terror, and our men are beginning to crack under the strain. I urgently request additional anti-aircraft, support and night fighter patrols. The night witches earn their fearsome nickname through a campaign of relentless, psychological pressure that goes beyond simple bombing. They strike the same targets night after night, never allowing the enemy to repair damage or recover their composure. A supply depot bombed on Monday burns again on Tuesday, then Wednesday, then Thursday, until German logistics officers abandon the position entirely rather than face another sleepless night of terror. They develop tactics specifically designed to maximize fear. Sometimes they fly in complete silence, gliding to their targets without using engines at all. Other times they deliberately let their engines sputter loudly, announcing their presence to keep defenders alert and terrified. They vary attack patterns, so enemy gunners can never anticipate their approach. They drop small bombs on seemingly random targets just to keep entire sectors on edge. Lieutenant Nadezhda Popova describes their psychological tactics in her post-war memoirs. "We knew the Germans feared us not just for the damage we caused, but for what we represented. An enemy they could not predict, could not intercept, could not escape. We used that fear as a weapon. Sometimes we would circle a target for an hour, engines growling in the distance, letting them imagine what was coming. The anticipation was often worse than the attack itself. But the true measure of their success comes in August 1942, when German High Command issues a special directive that will be captured and published after the war. Signed by Luftwaffe General Robert Ritter von Greim, it reads any pilot who shoots down a female Soviet aviator flying the Po-2 aircraft will receive immediate promotion and the Iron Cross. These attacks against our positions have reached intolerable levels and must be stopped by any means necessary. The very fact that such an order exists reveals how thoroughly the night witches have disrupted German operations. An enemy that was once dismissed as propaganda, mocked as Stalin's flying circus, has become valuable enough to warrant the Reich's highest military honors. The directive has an unintended consequence. It confirms to every German soldier on the Eastern Front that the night witches are real, dangerous, and worth Germany's best efforts to stop. It transforms them from rumor into legend, from nuisance into nemesis. The operation that gives our story its title unfolds on a cold October night in 1942, when the fate of the Eastern Front hangs in the balance. German forces have reached Stalingrad, and the battle for that city has devolved into a brutal, house-to-house struggle that consumes lives like kindling. To sustain their offensive, The Wehrmacht relies on a critical supply line running through a river valley south of Voronezh, a lifeline carrying ammunition, fuel and reinforcements to Army Group South. German intelligence has identified the route as impregnable to Soviet air attack. The valley is too narrow for large bombers to maneuver safely. It's defended by 1888 mm anti-aircraft guns positioned along the ridgelines. 3 squadrons of night fighters patrol the airspace, and searchlight batteries cover every approach. The convoy moves only during the darkest hours, when even moonlight cannot reveal its position. On October 18, 1942, Soviet military intelligence provides the 508th Night Bomber Regiment with detailed reconnaissance of the convoy's route, timing, and cargo. The information comes from partisans operating behind enemy lines, who have observed the convoys for weeks. The cargo includes 40,000 artillery shells, 200,000 liters of fuel, and small arms ammunition sufficient to sustain German forces at Stalingrad for 2 weeks. Major Bershanskaya studies the intelligence reports and reconnaissance photographs with growing excitement. This is the kind of target that can change the course of the battle, but only if they can reach it. The defenses seem impossible to penetrate, and the narrow valley makes retreat difficult. Any aircraft that enters that killing ground will have to run a gauntlet of fire with no room for error. She selects her most experienced crews for the mission, 3 flights of Po-2s, 9 aircraft in total, carrying just enough bombs to do the job if everyone finds its target. Each aircraft will carry 2 50-kilogram bombs and 2 25-kilogram bombs, 150 kilograms of high explosive per plane, 350 kilograms total. It's a trivial amount compared to what heavy bombers drop, but the Night Witches have learned that bombs don't need to be big if they hit the right targets. The mission briefing takes place in a farmhouse cellar that serves as the regiment's operations center. Bershanskaya spreads the reconnaissance photographs across a rough wooden table, pointing out key features with a stick. The convoy will enter the valley here at 0200 hours. They move slowly because the road is damaged from previous raids. The fuel tankers travel in the center of the column for protection. That's our primary target. Hit the tankers, and the resulting fire will spread to ammunition trucks. Secondary targets are the repair vehicles at the rear. Without them, damaged trucks cannot be fixed and will block the road. She pauses, looking each pilot and navigator in the eye. The defenses are formidable, but they expect an attack from the valley's mouth, where conventional bombers would approach. We will come from the south over the ridge, where they don't expect us. We'll use the ridge itself as cover until the last possible moment. Questions? Senior Lieutenant Galina Brock-Beltsova, chosen to lead the attack, asks the question on everyone's mind. What about fighters? If they catch us in the valley, there's no escape. Bershanskaya nods. The fighters patrol in circuits, 15 minutes on station, 15 minutes returning to refuel. Intelligence says they are most vulnerable during shift changes, when one flight leaves and another arrives. We have a 7-minute window. That's all. Get in, drop your bombs, get out. 7 minutes. In those 7 minutes, they must fly into one of the most heavily defended targets on the Eastern Front, execute precision bombing attacks, and escape before German fighters tear them from the sky. As darkness falls on October 18th, the Night Witches prepare their aircraft with the ritual efficiency of women who have done this 100 times before. Ground crew checks engine oil, fuel levels, control surfaces. Armorers load bombs into racks beneath the fuselage, double-checking fusing and release mechanisms. Navigators review their charts one final time, memorizing landmarks they'll use to find their way through the darkness. At 0130 hours, 9 Po-2s take off from their hidden airfield, climbing slowly into the star-filled October sky. The weather is perfect for their purposes, clear enough to navigate by stars, dark enough to remain invisible. The temperature at altitude hovers around -20 degrees Celsius, cold enough to numb exposed skin in minutes. They fly in loose formation, each pilot navigating by landmarks memorized during reconnaissance flights. A bend in the river here, a destroyed bridge there, a cluster of shell craters marking their path through the darkness. There's no radio communication, no formation lights, nothing to reveal their presence. Each pilot flies alone, trusting her sisters to maintain position through skill and experience. 20 miles from the target, Brock-Beltsova begins a climbing turn that will take her formation over the southern ridge. and into the valley from an unexpected direction. Her navigator, Sergeant Nina Raspopova, checks their position against the stars and taps Brock-Beltsova on the shoulder. 2 taps. The signal meaning on course on time. 15 miles out, they begin to see the glow on the horizon that marks their target, not the convoy itself, which maintains light discipline, but the searchlights and flares that German defenders use to illuminate the valley. The defenses are active, alert, waiting for an attack that intelligence has warned might come. 10 miles out, Brock-Beltsova cuts her engine and signals her wingmates to do the same. 9 Po-2s, each carrying 150 kilograms of high explosive, begin the long, silent glide that has made them legends. They fall through the night sky like hunting birds, descending from 2,000 meters, with nothing but the whisper of wind through their struts to mark their passage. At 8 miles, they cross the ridge at 1,500 meters, and Brock-Beltsova gets her first clear view of the target. The convoy stretches through the valley like a luminous snake, its headlights and running lights visible despite blackout precautions. She counts quickly. 23 trucks in the main column. Fuel tankers in the middle, just as intelligence predicted. Repair vehicles bringing up the rear. At 5 miles, German searchlights begin sweeping the valley's mouth, exactly where conventional bombers would approach. The defenses remain focused in the wrong direction, giving the Night Witches precious seconds of invisibility. At 2 miles, Brock-Beltsova can hear the rumble of truck engines and see individual vehicles clearly in the starlight. Her altimeter reads 800 meters. She has perhaps 2 minutes before someone on the ground spots her. Before the searchlights turn and the anti-aircraft guns open fire, at 1 mile, she lines up her approach on the lead fuel tanker, a massive vehicle carrying 10,000 liters of gasoline. Her hands are numb from cold despite heavy gloves, and ice has formed on her goggles, but her course is true. She can see the individual soldiers walking alongside the convoy, completely unaware that death approaches from above. At 400 meters altitude, she pulls the bomb release. 4 bombs, 2 50-kilogram, 2 25-kilogram, tumble through the darkness. She pulls up into a steep climb, her engine roaring back to life as she claws for altitude and escape. The first bomb hits directly in front of the lead fuel tanker, detonating in a flash of orange fire that illuminates the entire valley. The second bomb hits the tanker itself, and 10,000 liters of high-octane gasoline explodes in a mushroom cloud of flame that rises 200 meters into the air. The heat is so intense that Brock-Beltsova feels it from 600 meters above, and the shockwave rocks her fragile aircraft like a toy. But she's already gone, vanishing into the darkness while her wingmates begin their attacks. The second Po-2 targets another fuel tanker, igniting a secondary explosion that merges with the first into a single towering pillar of fire. The third aircraft drops its bombs on the ammunition trucks near the middle of the column. What happens next defies description. 23 tons of artillery shells begin detonating in a chain reaction that transforms the valley into a vision of hell. Explosions ripple through the convoy like firecrackers, each detonation triggering others in an accelerating cascade of destruction. Trucks are thrown into the air like toys, their wreckage landing hundreds of meters away. The fuel fires spread, igniting truck after truck until the entire convoy is ablaze. German anti-aircraft crews, finally realizing the attack comes from the south, swing their guns around and begin firing frantically into the sky. Tracers streak upward, searchlights slice through the smoke, but the Night Witches have already separated, each pilot flying her own evasive course through the chaos. The second flight of 3 Po-2s arrives 5 minutes later, when German defenders have finally oriented toward the threat. They face withering fire as they approach, but the smoke and flames from the burning convoy provide cover. They add their bombs to the inferno, targeting the repair vehicles at the rear and successfully blocking the road with burning wrecks. The third flight faces the worst conditions. By the time they arrive, every searchlight and gun in the valley is firing at anything that moves. Lieutenant Yevdokia Nosal's aircraft takes a direct hit from an 88mm shell that tears through her wing, but the fabric construction saves her. The shell passes through without detonating. She completes her bomb run with a wing full of holes and returns safely to base. The entire attack lasts 12 minutes. By 0212 hours, all 9 Po-2s have dropped their bombs and escaped into the darkness, climbing back over the southern ridge to safety. Behind them, the valley burns with fires visible from 80 kilometers away. German reports later confirm that the convoy was totally destroyed. All 23 trucks, 40,000 artillery shells, 200,000 liters of fuel, and the supplies that would have sustained German forces at Stalingrad for 2 weeks. The Soviet losses, one Po-2 with wing damage, repaired the next day. 0 casualties. When Brock-Beltzover's flight lands back at their airfield at 3:30 hours, exhausted and frozen but elated, they find Major Bershanskaya waiting with hot tea and the closest thing to a smile anyone has seen on her face in months. Word of the attack has already reached headquarters via radio intercepts of panicked German communications. "Well done," Bershanskaya says simply. Then, because she's never been one for sentimentality, rest for 3 hours. "We fly again tonight." The Germans have another convoy moving up to replace this one. The psychological impact of the raid echoes far beyond the material damage. German commanders, already struggling with the nightmare of Stalingrad, now face a new crisis. Their supply lines are no longer safe, even under cover of darkness. The meticulous planning, the formidable defenses, the night fighter patrols, none of it matters against an enemy that attacks from unexpected directions with tactics that conventional doctrine cannot counter. On October 20th, 2 days after the convoy attack, Luftwaffe headquarters issues new orders to night fighter squadrons across the Eastern Front. Hunting down the Night Witches becomes their top priority, superseding all other missions. Elite pilots, some with dozens of kills to their credit, receive explicit orders to destroy the wooden biplanes at any cost. It should be easy. On paper, the matchup favors the Germans overwhelmingly. A Messerschmitt Bf 110 night fighter carries 4 7.92 MiGs machine guns and 2 20mm cannons, sophisticated radar, and a top speed of 560 km per hour. The Po-2 carries no weapons, no radar, and its top speed barely exceeds 150 km per hour. A single burst from a Bf 110 should tear the fragile biplane to pieces. But shooting down a Po-2 proves far more difficult than anyone expects, and the attempts lead to frustration bordering on madness. The fundamental problem is one of physics and tactics that German engineers never anticipated. German fighters, designed for high-speed interceptions against conventional bombers, simply cannot slow down enough to engage the lumbering biplanes effectively. The Bf 110's stall speed, the minimum velocity at which it can maintain controlled flight, is higher than the Po-2's maximum speed. To match speeds with a Night Witch requires the German pilot to slow to the edge of stalling, where the smallest error means loss of control and a death spiral into the ground. Lieutenant Fritz Müller, a veteran pilot with 12 confirmed kills, attempts his first interception of a Po-2 on the night of November 3, 1942. His radar operator picks up a target flying at 800 meters altitude, moving slowly south. Müller positions his Bf 110 for an attack from above and behind, the textbook approach that has worked perfectly against British bombers. He begins his dive, closing rapidly on the target. At 300 meters distance, he identifies the biplane silhouette and prepares to fire. But as he slows to match the Po-2's speed, his aircraft begins buffeting, the warning signs of an impending stall. He fights the controls, trying to maintain position while his airspeed bleeds off. The moment he has a firing solution, the Po-2 pilot, whether through skill or luck, banks hard left and descends into a shallow dive. Müller tries to follow. His Bf 110, already at minimum speed, cannot match the maneuver. The nose drops violently, the left wing stalls, and suddenly he's spiraling toward the ground at 200 meters altitude, with darkness all around and the altimeter unwinding faster than his mind can process. He barely recovers, pulling out at 50 meters, with his hands shaking and his heart pounding. The Po-2, meanwhile, has vanished completely into the darkness below. Müller returns to base and files a report that reads like an excuse. Target evaded through unconventional maneuvering. Unable to maintain pursuit at low speed. Recommend alternative tactics. His squadron commander reads the report and asks the question everyone at Luftwaffe headquarters is beginning to ask. How can Germany's elite pilots be unable to shoot down obsolete biplanes flown by women? The problem isn't just speed. It's visibility, altitude, and the Po-2's complete unpredictability. German night fighters rely on radar to find targets, but the Po-2's wooden construction gives almost no radar return. The fighters must spot them visually, which means flying low where the biplanes operate, searching darkness that can hide a small aircraft until it's too late. When fighters do manage visual contact, the Po-2 pilots prove to be as skilled at evasion as they are at attack. They dive into valleys where fighters dare not follow. They fly so low that they disappear against the ground. They wait until the fighter commits to an attack run, then cut their engines and drop like stones, leaving the German pilot overshooting at high speed with no way to slow down. Major Hans-Joachim Marseille, one of Germany's highest-scoring aces with 158 confirmed kills, writes in his diary about the frustration of chasing night witches. They are like trying to catch smoke with your bare hands. You see them, you position for attack, you prepare to fire, and they are simply not there anymore. They drop, they turn, they do things that would tear a normal aircraft apart. And you cannot follow because your aircraft was not designed to fly like a mosquito. It is maddening beyond description. I would rather face a squadron of Spitfires than spend another night chasing these damned wooden ghosts. The few successful interceptions only highlight the problems and the courage of the night witches. On December 8, 1942, Lieutenant Kurt Welter finally manages to shoot down a Po-2 after a pursuit that lasts 18 minutes, an eternity in aerial combat. His after-action report reads like a confession of professional embarrassment. I detected the target at 0237 hours at 1,200 meters altitude. I approached from the rear and above, standard intercept procedure. The target descended rapidly to 400 meters. I followed, but was forced to reduce speed to avoid overshooting. At 300 meters distance, the target's engine stopped, and it descended to 200 meters altitude. I lost visual contact and spent 7 minutes searching. I reacquired the target at 0245 hours, now at 600 meters altitude. It appeared to be climbing for another attack run. Lieutenant Nadezhda Popova develops a particularly terrifying tactic. She flies low enough that her prop wash kicks up dust from the ground, then deliberately passes near German searchlight positions. The searchlights, trained to watch the sky, miss her completely as she skims past at 50 meters altitude. By the time they realize where she is, her bombs are falling on the targets behind them. The human cost of this aerial warfare becomes starkly apparent as winter approaches and the war grinds into its second full year. The open cockpits of the Po-2s offer no protection from the savage cold of high altitude, and many night witches suffer severe frostbite that costs them fingers, toes, or worse. The constant night missions leave them exhausted and hollow-eyed, sustained only by raw determination and the unbreakable bonds they've forged with their sisters-in-arms flying at 2,000 meters altitude in an open cockpit when the temperature sits at minus 40 degrees. Celsius is like being beaten by frozen hammers. The wind tears at exposed skin with physical force. Ice forms on goggles, on instrument dials, on the control stick itself. Breathing becomes painful as the frigid air sears lungs with each inhalation. Nadezhda Popova, one of the regiment's most decorated pilots with 852 combat sorties by war's end, later recalls the physical toll. We flew in temperatures that froze our breath solid in our throats. My hands were so cold I could barely grip the controls. I steered with my wrists sometimes because my fingers had no feeling. Your face becomes numb. Your lips crack and bleed and ice crystals form in your hair. But we flew anyway, because our country was burning and someone had to put out the fires. Frostbite becomes so common that the regiment's medical officer starts conducting daily inspections, checking fingers and toes for the telltale white patches that signal tissue death. She treats dozens of cases each month, and several pilots lose toes to amputation, yet they return to flight status within weeks, stuffing extra cloth into their boots to fill the space where toes used to be. The exhaustion proves equally brutal. Night witches fly multiple sorties each night, sometimes as many as 8 missions between dusk and dawn. Each mission lasts 30 to 45 minutes. Takeoff, flight to target, bombing run, return to base. Then 30 minutes on the ground for refueling and rearming, before taking off again into the darkness. Sleep becomes a luxury measured in minutes rather than hours. Pilots learn to doze while ground crew services their aircraft, to nap during the brief periods between missions, to function on 2 or 3 hours of sleep per 24-hour cycle. The cumulative exhaustion builds until some pilots hallucinate in flight, seeing phantom aircraft or mistaking stars for searchlights. Yet between missions, in the brief hours when they're not preparing for the next night's raid or collapsing into exhausted sleep, these young women maintain a spirit that war cannot crush. They share letters from home, huddling together to read news from families they haven't seen in years. They mend each other's flight suits with needles and thread scrounged from villages. They find moments of laughter even in the depths of winter, joking about the absurdity of their situation. Women flying wooden planes into hell, night after night, because someone has to. Photographs from this period, taken by war correspondents who visit the regiment, show them gathered around tiny stoves in earthen dugouts that serve as living quarters. Their faces are gaunt, aged far beyond their years by stress and hardship, but their eyes remain bright with the fierce joy of women who have found their purpose in the darkest hour of their nation's history. They celebrate birthdays with whatever food they can scrounge, usually just black bread and weak tea, occasionally supplemented with captured German chocolate or sausage. They sing songs from before the war, folk melodies that remind them of homes that may no longer exist. They tell stories about peacetime, keeping alive memories of a world where people didn't die every night. The bonds forged in these frozen barracks go deeper than friendship. They become a sisterhood, sealed by shared danger and mutual dependence. Every pilot knows that her survival depends not just on her own skill, but on her wingmates, her navigator, her ground crew. When aircraft fail to return from missions, the survivors mourn not just comrades but family members. Sisters in every way except blood, Lieutenant Paulina Gelman, whose navigator is killed by flak in January 1943, refuses to fly for 3 days, breaking down completely in a way that combat stress never managed. Major Bershanskaya doesn't order her back into the cockpit. Instead, she sits with Gelman through the long hours of grief, saying little, offering only presence and understanding. When Gelman finally returns to flight status, she's paired with a new navigator, but she carries a photograph of her fallen sister in her flight suit pocket for the rest of the war. When new replacements arrive, fresh from training and terrified of what awaits them, the veterans take them under their wings with a protective instinct that transcends military hierarchy. They teach them the tricks that training school never covers: how to judge altitude by the sound of wind through struts, how to tell real fires from decoy flames, how to tell when a searchlight beam is about to hit you so you can dive away in time. Senior Lieutenant Yevgenia Zhigulenko, a veteran of over 800 missions, adopts a routine of flying with every new pilot on their first 3 combat sorties, leading them to easier targets where the defenses are lighter. You have to survive long enough to learn, she explains. After 3 missions, you've learned the basics of survival. After 10, you might start being useful. After 50, you're either an ace or dead. My job is to get them to mission 3. These relationships sustain them through losses that would break conventional military units. By early 1943, the 508th has lost nearly half its original personnel to combat, accidents, and the brutal conditions of war. 28 women killed in action, 14 more in flying accidents, 6 captured by German forces. Yet morale remains unshakable, because each woman knows that her sisters will never abandon her, never leave her behind, never let her sacrifice be forgotten. As the tide of war slowly turns, and German forces begin their long retreat westward after the catastrophic defeat at Stalingrad, the Night Witches continue their relentless campaign of harassment and destruction. They follow the Wehrmacht back across the Ukraine in the spring of 1943, their targets shifting from defensive operations to pursuit, harassing German retreat, destroying bridges to slow their escape, attacking supply lines to deny them the resources they need to establish new defensive positions. The Red Army's great offensives of 1943 and 1944, the breakthrough at Kursk, the liberation of Kiev, the advance into Poland, all feature the Night Witches flying ahead of the main forces, disrupting German defenses and sowing confusion in enemy rear areas. Soviet ground commanders learn to love the sound of PO2 engines overhead because it means the enemy won't sleep, won't rest, won't have a moment's peace. They continue their campaign as Soviet forces push into Eastern Europe, following the Red Army across Poland in the autumn of 1944 and into Germany itself in 1945. Their wooden planes, which once defended Soviet soil from invasion, become instruments of vengeance as they rain fire on the nation that started the war. Senior Lieutenant Nadezhda Popova's final mission comes on May 4, 1945, just days before Germany's surrender. She flies a harassment raid against German positions outside Berlin, dropping her bombs on troops that are already preparing to surrender. When she lands back at her airfield for the last time as a combat pilot, she climbs out of her cockpit, sits down on the ground, and weeps, not from relief that she survived, but from exhaustion and grief for all those who didn't. The statistics of their achievement read like fiction, numbers so large they lose meaning until you remember that each sortie represented 2 women flying into darkness and death, 23,772 combat sorties flown by the 588th Night Bomber Regiment alone, 3,000 tons of bombs dropped, countless supply lines severed, airfields destroyed, enemy positions neutralized. The German 4th Panzer Army's records show that in one particularly brutal 2-week period in August 1943, the Night Witches attacked their positions 258 times, causing 842 casualties and destroying 37 vehicles. 23 women of the 588th received the Hero of the Soviet Union Medal, their country's highest decoration for valor, equivalent to the American Medal of Honor or the British Victoria Cross. Lieutenant Nadezhda Popova receives the award after completing her 852nd combat sortie. Senior Lieutenant Yevgenia Zhigulenko gets hers after 858 missions. Every one of those women earned the medal through courage that defied comprehension, flying night after night into hell and returning to do it again. But perhaps more importantly than any medal or statistic, they prove conclusively that courage and determination can overcome any technological disadvantage, that gender has nothing to do with the capacity for heroism, and that the most dangerous enemy is the one you underestimate. Yet as victory approaches and the world begins to celebrate the end of the most devastating war in human history, the Night Witches find themselves caught in the machinery of political necessity. Stalin's Soviet Union, transitioning from wartime ally to Cold War adversary, has little use for heroes who might overshadow the glory of the state or complicate the narrative of male martial supremacy.